Strangers and Aliens, interview with director Brock Heasley. Hey everyone, I'm Ben Avery. This is Strangers and Aliens, which is about that kind of nexus point between spirituality and sci-fi and fantasy and creativity and Christianity. And today we're going to be talking with someone who has absolutely been doing pretty exciting work that sits right in the middle there, kind of taking a look at some storytelling that he's done. And it is a film that is science fiction. It sits in that zone, Twilight Zone. That's where it sits. It sits in the Twilight Zone. And it's a lot of fun. It gets into the multiverse, but it also gets some real spiritual ideas. And so, Brock, I'm so excited to talk with you about the shift and about what you're doing with the shift right now. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I'm excited to get into it. It's always fun to talk to somebody who, has all the same passions that I have, and everything that your show is about is everything everything that's in the shift and everything that I'm just crazy about on a day-to-day basis.
So just so people know, The Shift is a movie that came out from Angel Studios last year, November, right?
It was December 1. It was released last year. Yeah.
So last year, December. It was a movie I went and saw in theaters, and I talked about it in our year-end review, just of the things we went and saw with Evan at the end of 2023 or beginning of 2024. But I haven't done an episode about it, and actually had planned to, and then it was like, it's been so long ago now. Then I saw something on Facebook. It was a post it's from Angel Studios about the novelization of The Shift, which is also kind of its own fascinating thing. After reading the introduction and kind of seeing what the story is of the novelization, in some ways that almost intrigues me more as far as just the storyline of how you got to that final part of the story right now. But but The Shift itself is a movie that, like I said, it has a multiversal angle to it. It definitely feels like a Twilight Zone film. And so that kind of low-key, not space opera, science fiction, but that personal, more grounded science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
So Brock, tell us a little bit then about your background and where you kind of came from before you were connected with Angel Studios and really started pushing out the feature film of the show.
Yeah. So for me, I've always had a passion for sci-fi and particularly like comics. I was just way into comics as a kid and even dabbled a little bit in making my own. Didn't really think about, writing my own stories and making up my own stories until I was in like my late 20s. And I just kind of followed that for a while. And as a side hobby, something I'd work on late at night after my wife had gone to bed, and just writing books and comics and doing all kinds of things, and never thinking I would ever get into filmmaking. And about 10 years ago, my wife and I, we both lost our jobs within 24 hours of each other. I've been working as a graphic designer previous to that, and really struggled to find work again, and just couldn't connect with an employer and couldn't connect with a paycheck. And that's when that became a matter of sincere prayer for both my wife and I. Like, what are we supposed to do here? Because nothing's working out. We got bills to pay. And so, long story short, the answer to that prayer was to get into filmmaking. And that was not a way to pay the bills. Anybody who jumps...
wait a minute.
Yeah, no. Anybody who jumps, into the beginning of filmmaking, it's a lot of working for free and a lot of just learning and volunteering. And so I did that for a number of years, and I still don't quite know how we made it through that financially, but we did. And in the course of that, I wrote and directed my first short film. It was called The Shift. I saw it very much as a kind of like a lost Twilight Zone episode, where the twist at the end is that it has a spiritual angle. And if you go back and you find that original short film, which is on our upcoming special edition Blu-ray, and also it's on YouTube, you can find it. And if you think about it in that way, if you watch it, not knowing that it's got a spiritual angle to it, that that angle does play as a twist at the end of it. So I made that very much just wanting to see if I could write and direct, see if I was capable of doing that, and not thinking anything of it beyond that, because who mixes science fiction, the Twilight Zone, or anything like that with faith, and who would do that, and who would watch that? And that was kind of the thought that everybody had who would, help me make it, was just like, this is cool, but what are you going to do with it? And then Angel Studios came along, and they were just getting started, and they just had like the pilot for The Chosen out.
Okay.
And they were, and I looked at that, and I saw something tonally similar to what I had done in The Shift, whereas I had done science fiction, but I had done something kind of darker and grittier and more grounded. And I saw The Chosen as doing that same thing, but doing it with the story of Christ. Tonally, they had some similarities, and I thought, well, you know, if anybody can understand what I've done, what The Shift is, it's probably these guys. And so I really sent it into them just through their website. You know, they had a way to submit projects, and I was really just hoping to get on their website so that I could make a little bit of money from the short, which I hadn't done yet. And they saw it, and they said, well, shoot, this is really interesting. And the next thing I knew, I was on the phone with the heads of the company, and they said, is there more to this story? Is this it, this short, or do you have more? And I said, well, I have some ideas. I don't have a script, but I have some ideas about how to turn this into a movie. And they said, well, great. Well, we're going to help you do that. And then we were off to the races, and it's a very long story short. 5 years later, it came out in theaters.
Okay. So I wonder what the timeline was like, because
Yeah.
Okay, so five years then, because I remember when they first put out like their website and said you could submit your own ideas.
Mhm.
A buddy of mine submitted a few things and was like, "Hey Ben, just check this out." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." And
Yeah.
and then it's like they're the biggest thing ever. Is like, oh, this is great as far as like creating faith-based and family-friendly
Right.
things, and it's just like this is pretty fantastic. And yeah, so 5 years then, and so how long were you developing then the story, like to expand it from that short film into that feature length screenplay?
Yeah, so I was probably percolating, you know, the ideas in my head for, you know, a couple of, you know, the short film was made in 2015. It was about a year after that that the post-production was completed, and it started getting out there. People started, because the short film ends kind of in a cliffhanger, but it wasn't intended to be. To me, it just was the ending of the story. But I had a lot of people coming up to me and saying, you know, what happens after? Like, what, you know, and I thought, well, nothing. Like, I mean, or whatever you imagine. Like, that's the end of the story. But as I thought about that more and more, I just started generating ideas. And my way of kind of, you know, following the muse is just to have a Word doc that I just dump ideas into, not really knowing what they're going to be. And so for a couple of years, probably before I got in touch with Angel Studios, I had just been dumping ideas into this Word doc. And by the time they asked me, is there more? I pretty much had the full outline in my head, or and at least spread across this doc.
Right.
That's pretty close to what you saw in theaters.
Okay.
So I had a decent idea in that sense. And then yeah, but then it was 5 years after that the film got made. So all told, you're talking about, you know, 8 years of just from like first thinking of doing the short film to the release of the feature film.
So this next question, it might be as simple an answer as just had an idea, but
Yeah.
what kind of got you thinking to do this story though? Like what caused you to say, I
Right.
want to tell the story of this guy who's doing this thing? And I want to be careful about spoiling too much. I probably will end up kind of talking about some of the plot elements, but I really don't want to spoil too much because I do want to encourage people, like,
Yeah.
check it out, watch this movie. This movie, it was so enjoyable for me to watch in the theater and just be able to say I'm watching a theatrically, in a film produced specifically to be seen in theaters, that has that spiritual elements and that, and it's kind of not quite a retelling, but definitely is inspired by and is taking cues from the Book of Job.
That's how we always thought of it, inspired
but taking
by.
verses from the Book of Job even and putting those on the screen kind of to like here's the next, I guess it's not act breaks because there's, I think, 5 or 6 of them, but like here's the next section. It's going to kind of be diving into this portion of what would have been Job's emotional arc, and we're going to have a character kind of going through that same emotional arc. And
yeah, that is something we kind of highlighted in the final film, where you do have these verses pop up, although we don't identify them as such until the end of the film. But that was actually something that developed really late in the post-production process. That wasn't part of the original script. But there's a difference between how subtle I want to be as a writer and how subtle the audience will allow me to be. And we found that the audience needed just a little bit more hand-holding as we did test readings. And so that's why those things are in there. But in the original conception of the film, I wanted it to be inspired by Job, but I didn't necessarily want to tip my hat to that so much as it ended up being. But in any case, I think it's a fairly innocuous addition. I don't think it affects the viewing too much, and in some ways, it even enhances it.
I would say it does enhance it. Just if you know, like I did, and that's what really intrigued me before I saw it in the theater. Was I can't remember what I saw. I think it's just a friend of mine posting saying this is a science fiction movie that's kind of inspired by Job. Job is one of my favorite books in the Bible, and I told you that I worked on comic books from the Bible, and the favorite thing I've ever done from the Bible was doing all 4 Gospels and kind of putting it in linear chronological order.
Oh, cool.
But the second favorite thing I did was when the publisher said, "Hey, we need someone to do the Book of Job. Are you interested?" And I was just, I am there. I'm so excited about this because it's just a powerful story. On the literary side, what I like about it, doing it as a comic book is, they say Shakespeare needs to be seen rather than read. And I taught Shakespeare in English high school. And I just feel like the Book of Job needs to be seen so you can kind of keep track of who's saying what, like who's saying these long blocks of text and and you don't have that exact one for one but you do have that, like I said, that character is emotional art. And then there's some of the things that the benefactor says that really reminded me of things that some of Job's friends were saying when I was watching. So
there's a couple of characters in the film. The benefactor is one of them. The benefactor is, well, for those that have not seen it at all, the story is about a man who is, having a hard time in his marriage. He's not as perfect as Job. He's having a hard time in his marriage, hard time at work, having a really bad day. And that's when a mysterious stranger approaches him, and this stranger has some pretty significant powers to kind of move between the multiverse. And that in their encounter goes badly. And our Job, his name is Kevin, he ends up banished to a dark parallel world where he is then fighting to get back to the woman that he loves, to his own world. And so none of that sounds like Job, but
no,
but it's pretty clear by the end, what I'm doing. And that's why some people would say it was based on Job, and it's not. It's very much inspired by. But characters like the benefactors also, Kevin does have friends on this dystopian reality, and some of the things that they say kind of get into some of the things that Job's friends would talk to him. And so these really important conversations that Job has in the Bible with his friends about the nature of suffering and evil and God's presence or absence. These conversations happen in the shift, but just in a slightly different way and in a totally different context.
And when I went into it, I was wondering, like, is this just going to be like one for one? Are we watching, like, we're just going to see science fiction version of Job? And it really is. And part of it is that there's the multiverse. Job does not have a multiverse.
Right.
Spoiler if you haven't read the Bible. But also a part of it is that it's also grounded in kind of our present day reality. And that's one of the great things about Twilight Zone is the Twilight Zone takes people you can really relate to. And that's why it's so effective in just that short amount of time. And, a half-hour episode. Actually, the hour-long episodes of Twilight Zone I felt like weren't as effective for some reason.
I totally agree.
But those half-hour episodes, it's just compressed, but you're watching a character you can relate to. You may not be that person, but you know that person. And that's kind of the same here. And in fact, I was struck with Kevin. I mean, a lot of what he's going through is stuff I have never ever been through. But I have a number of friends who have been through similar situations, and watching him in his marriage at the beginning and seeing like why their marriage, because it starts out, and this part I will at least spoil. There's a really fun meet cute at the beginning. Where Kevin meets, I can't remember her name now. Molly. And it's this meet cute, and I don't know if you would call it that. I don't know if you would call it that.
No, it's that.
And
definitely.
It's just a sweet little moment. They're flirting, and then as they're flirting, you get these kind of montage things that kind of show you the fast forward of the relationship. And then when you jump into the story, though, with them, their marriage is on the rocks because they've lost a child, and that's something that like a lot of marriages just don't survive is when
Right.
loss of a child or finding out that a child has some sort of disease or has an accident and has a disability or something like that. And so that stepping into that, it was like, wow, okay, I can relate. I don't feel like I am that guy, but I definitely know that guy. And
Yeah.
yeah. And so it felt realistic, and there was definite realism to it that pulls you in then. So when you cross the universes, it's like, yeah, I can go with this guy now because
Yeah.
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 So,
No, and the same, like I actually have a child with special needs. And that is a particular strain on a marriage that is, it's not as, I don't think it's probably as severe as losing a child, although the divorce rate for people in our situation is 80%.
Yeah.
And thankfully my wife and I, we're 24 years and going strong. But yeah, it is, we've all got our relationships, and many of us are married, and there are strains that enter into that. And it's very easy for me anyway to look back and think about those moments in my marriage where I made a call, I made a decision. Well, I'm going to sacrifice my ego. I'm going to sacrifice what I want for this partnership that's so important to me. And it's very easy to imagine going the other way, and where I could have just dug in my heels and said, no, I'm not doing that. And that's kind of what I wanted to get at and illustrate with the shift with Molly and Kevin, is to say, here's a marriage that's going through something really, really real and very and very stressful. And how do these two people deal with it? And then before they get to resolve that, that's when Kevin gets yanked away. And so that becomes this hanging thread in the movie, where you've got this guy who's, he's already struggling with his marriage. Now he's separated from his wife, but he's trying to get back to her. Well, what happens when he gets back to her? Well, it's not like they were in a great place,
Right,
and so it's this question that kind of hangs over the movie. That I think, for my money, we obviously, I think we end up in a pretty interesting spot in how we answer that question and what happens when they come back together. But I've been married so long. I mean, marriage and relationships are endlessly fascinating to me, and the stresses in particular, just because I think they're so difficult to navigate. And as you say, they're so relatable. We all have those stresses that we have to navigate now and again.
The other kind of literary inspiration, I don't know if it's inspiration, but thing that I saw was just, I'm reminded so much of the Odyssey, where it's just Odysseus just trying to get home, and everything's in his way to get, and that's where another, just I can relate as far as like, he just wants to get home to the person he loves. And it's just, the other thing is it's a fun movie too. Like that's the other thing for me, is that I just really enjoyed watching it. When I watched it the second time, there were things I was picking up at the beginning that I remember puzzling over in the theater. Like, what does that even mean when they're, when the benefactor would say something, and then, now I know what that means, so repeat viewing was a lot of fun. It's not that you need a repeat viewing, but it definitely made it
rewards
a little bit more deeper when I was watching that second time. So.
Yeah. And that was very much by design. I love things that when I watch them again, they take on additional meanings for me. And so designing a story in that way was very intentional. And I want people to be asking questions. I don't think that there is a school of thought with movies that they should be simple and not complicated, and you should be able to get it on the first pass. I'm not really super into that. Those aren't the movies that I tend to enjoy the most. I love things that I can puzzle over and that I can, rediscover even later and see new layers and new meanings. Now, you don't want to lose the audience, and certainly this was a very much a learning experience for me in that way, because, we went through a number of test screenings and we found out where we were losing the audience and where we weren't. And there was also an acceptance on my part and on the studio's part, even, that, not the entire audience is going to get this one. That tends to be a risk with sci-fi anyway.
Right.
Sci-fi famously has an average for cinema score. Cinema score is how an audience rates it. Like they do these polls, like after they leave it, like, what do you rate the movie? And sci-fi notoriously is always in the B range. Like even something like Inception, I think, came in at a B+, instead of an A. And because there's always just a segment of the audience that just can't quite make that leap with you. So there was always an acceptance of that. Yeah.
My wife tried to read my novel. I have a science fiction novel that I wrote. She tried to read it, and Actually, the dedication is let's see if I can get the wording here. Here it is. For Pam, even if it's not the kind of thing she typically read, she encouraged me to write it, and I hope she at least reads the dedication. So she did get that far in the book.
That's fantastic.
But she just doesn't connect to that kind of thing. And it's a lot easier for me to connect with stuff that she likes to watch than for her to connect to the things that I like to watch.
Right. No, and for me, one of the ways that I focused on bridging that gap, and I think the reason that my wife, who isn't a fan of sci-fi, actually does genuinely love this movie. She's my harshest critic, so she would definitely tell me if she didn't. But she genuinely loves the movie. And that's because more than the sci-fi, I focus so much on the emotional core, on Kevin and Molly. It's if there can be such a thing, I think The Shift succeeds as kind of a sci-fi date movie where there is this really focused romance kind of at the center of this whole thing. You know, I didn't shy away from that in the story and really focusing on the characters in that way. So I like to think of it as, you know, maybe you hear it and if you're not a sci-fi fan, you think, well, that movie probably isn't for me. But what I have heard over and over again from people is that those who have taken a chance on it, for whom that genre isn't necessarily their favorite, they really end up loving this movie. Those that open themselves up to it, because it does have that emotional core where it's really founded on this romance and this relationship.
Now, as far as your cast goes, the two leads, Kevin and Molly, I don't think I've ever seen them before. But you cast two of my favorite guys in there. With Sean Astin and Neil McDonough.
Right.
And now Neil McDonough I knew from a show called Boomtown, which is one of my favorite non-sci-fi TV shows of all time. I just love that show. Every episode was its own Rashomon. So every episode you follow the story and it just jumps from one character then to the next and you see the whole thing again from a new perspective. And then the next you see the whole thing and it just twists your perspective with every single episode.
Oh, that's awesome.
But it was a little too much for the viewing public, I guess, because season 2, which lasted 3 episodes, they ditched that completely and went to more of your procedural kind of Law and Order type of a show. And it lasted 3 episodes. So,
you can't just abandon your premise. Like you can't do that.
Well, I think
that's crazy.
The key to it was not enough people were able to follow and enjoy that whole premise that they had where, because it would be, you follow one cop as he's chasing a criminal and then you follow the criminal and you see like the different perspective. And then Neil McDonough played I believe he was a lawyer. He was like the city's attorney, prosecuting attorney. And he was having an affair with a reporter. And then his wife was, and so those kind of your main cast for these cops, these lawyers, and then the people who are connected to their lives. And that's how I first became aware of him. And I love that show so much. So then it's like anything he's in, I'm like, I'm interested. Of course, then I go back and watch Star Trek First Contact and he's on the bridge. I'm like, wait a minute. That's him. That's the guy I like.
He is in everything. It's amazing. I'm watching Tulsa King right now. He's in that, you know. It's great.
I haven't been watching that. So yeah.
No, it's a fun show.
He's fantastic. And then of course from Lord of the Rings with Sean Astin.
Sean, yeah.
And then John Billingsley, another Star Trek actor.
John's fantastic in the movie. He's so much fun.
Yeah, no, he's great. I mean, he's funny because of just the way he plays the character. But then toward the end, there's some stuff going on, and I'm like genuinely terrified for him. Like this is, oh no, like the funny guy who's, So, but your two leads, how did you connect with them? Was there a casting call kind of thing, or?
So we pretty much all of our top line casts were offers. So it was just about, I'm such a student of film and television, and I'm pretty familiar. There's hardly an actor you can name that I don't have some familiarity with, at least. And so Christopher Palaha plays our Kevin, and he's one of these guys that has been around for a while and been in a lot of my favorite things. He had a recurring role on Mad Men. He was in Wonder Woman 1984 as the guy whose body Chris Pine hijacks. So none of that movie is his fault, but he comes in at the end and gives us really, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But when he does get a chance to be himself in that movie, he's pretty terrific. And he's also in Jurassic World Dominion, and he's just done all kinds of things. And he's done a lot. He's done a few Hallmark things as well. So he's this really great romantic leading man who can also do action and serious drama. He's just Chris is kind of the whole package. And so when I became even more familiar with his work through the casting process on The Shift, I as soon as I saw his work, I was like, oh, that's our guy. And Chris gets to do everything in this movie. I mean, he is running, he is kissing, he is suffering and crying. I mean, and in fact, if you ever hear him talk about it, this was kind of his dream role in a lot of ways, just because it ticked so many boxes as an actor of things that he wanted to do. And he's in every scene of the movie. So it's really tremendous what he did and what he gave to the film. And then playing Molly is Elizabeth Tabish, and Elizabeth is, or Liz, as I call her, everybody who knows her calls her, she is also Mary Magdalene in The Chosen, the series on the life of Christ. And she's just a tremendous actor.
That's my
you gotta check
shame.
it out. Yeah, it's incredible. It's so well done, and she's so good in it. And she's actually, her character gets the biggest spotlight in the very first episode of The Chosen. Is all about her and her character, and she's terrific, and she brings so much to Molly, with a lot less screen time than Chris, but really you feel that connection between them.
Well, and I guess so. I have seen Chris in a lot of things, like just stuff you're mentioning. Like I've seen him there. I just didn't realize that's who I was seeing. But
right,
he carries this movie. I mean, it's on his shoulders, and I mean, I don't want to spoil too much, but it is a multiverse story, and so there are opportunities to see other versions of some of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the one scene toward the middle that I don't want to spoil at all, but it's a really interesting performance that goes against type of what his character is.
Yeah.
That we're actually following, the version of Kevin that we're following. And yeah, it was, I'm just rewatching it. I was like, oh, I forgot about the scene. This is so cool.
Yeah. And Chris loved that stuff. He loved tearing into that. And there's some things he does in that scene. If you're referring to the one I think you are, there's a particular point in which he just starts laughing, and that wasn't in the script, and it was an idea he had, and I just wasn't really sure that was going to work, but he was so passionate about it. I was like, all right, go for it. We'll fix it in editing if it doesn't work. And it ended up being one of my favorite things in the movie, where he just starts laughing spontaneously in the middle of this scene, and it's so fantastic. It's so much fun. But yeah, Chris really brought a lot to the film.
So, I mean, on the creative side, then the movie's done. You've put a bow on it. It's been released in theaters. How has the response been? How have you felt about the response, and how have people been responding to you about it?
Well, it's always difficult when you take your baby and you put it out into the world, because you lose total control over it. And I always knew that this film was going to generate some interesting responses. And I kind of anticipated there'd be the initial response, and then there'd be the response over time. And, and so I think we're still kind of in the middle of the beginning of the response to The Shift. I heard it said recently that it's not until about 10 years after a movie comes out that you really understand what it is and what its reputation is and what it's going to be, whether it fades into obscurity or it becomes appreciated more. And of course, the hope is that things become even more appreciated over time. But in its initial release, it was met with a lot of passion from the people who went out to see it in the theater and were excited about seeing something really different and new. And that's the thing that I knew stepping into it, that it really was, and that it was really hard to get it. One of the reasons it was so hard to get it made and why it took so many years, because if you look at the landscape of films that deal with faith, you're not going to find any science fiction films. I mean, I maybe there's been one or two over the years, but it's not really the go-to.
It's a very small handful,
Yeah. I can't even think of any off the top of my head. But
I can think of one, Time Changer. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but it's
I think I have heard. That came out that came out like 20
It's
years ago or something like that.
maybe even a little more, maybe a little bit less, but yeah, it's been a long time since that thing.
So, needless to say, I think the faith audience, and look, I don't even like to call the shift faith-based. I think that has so much stigma attached to it, and that's not really how I ever thought of the film. I thought of the film as a science fiction film first. And then within science fiction, I feel like you can deal with anything. You could talk about anything through science fiction because science fiction genre opens you up to metaphors and allegories and storytelling devices that you don't have elsewhere. I mean, Star Trek famously used it to talk about the social issues of the day back in the 60s and continues to do that now because you can talk about anything with science fiction. So why not talk about faith? It's just one more thing that can fit into the genre of science fiction. And so for me, making the shift, that's how I thought of it. Why not? Why not do this? And for some people, the answer is, well, because God is not fictional, and how dare you mix, science fiction into faith? But I think that's a minority of the audience. Most of the people, I believe, who found out about the film and discovered it, they wanted to give it a chance. And those that did and went in with open hearts and open minds, they found something that they're really passionate about. Now, we had our detractors as well, both critically and otherwise, theologically speaking. We certainly had that. But I think with anything new, it's what it is and its appreciation. I think that is something that occurs more over time than initially. But certainly we did well. The film did not flop. It did well, and it continues to amass. I know I'm painting this dour picture. I like to put things in the proper context. It was not a flop. It did well, and it's continuing to amass more and more people and following, and that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do the novel. I just felt like as audiences were coming in and people were wanting more. That's the thing I get a lot of people have questions and there's things that they want to know more about, and I think that's true of any great science fiction story. We just want more of it. There's a whole world that's been built, whether you're talking about Back to the Future or Star Wars or whatever. The science fiction writer has to build a world in which to inhabit the story, and a world built on rules and imagination. And of course, like every other sci-fi movie out there, The Shift was built with a world that's much bigger than could be captured on the screen. And so that was one of my reasons for wanting to write the novel, is to give people that more they kept on asking me for.
I mean, I don't know how many Twilight Zone episodes you could look at, or even Star Trek episodes, or, almost any of those episodic kind of things where at the end, there could be a lot more, but we've only got 45 minutes or 22 minutes to tell the story. And you talk about the short feeling like it may be ended on a cliffhanger, but that's how it was intended. Right. Because it's a short. And so you tell the story you want to tell, and with Twilight Zone, you get to that punchline, and then what's going to happen next to that guy? That's what the punchline is.
Yeah.
You can make your imagine, but that's, imagine what's going to happen to this guy who loves to read, but dropped his glasses and there's no one,
exactly.
in the apocalypse, you could tell the story of the guy trying to find more glasses. You could tell the story of but you end it on that emotional punchline. And this, though, I mean, absolutely, the film, it was not unsatisfying. Like, it wasn't like it was a satisfying conclusion for sure. But I am curious because you do have this book coming out alongside. So right now you can watch The Shift streaming on Angel Studios, right?
Yeah, it's on the Angel app. As a member of the Guild, you can watch it. It's also on Amazon, YouTube, Apple TV. You can rent it, and then we have it on disc as well.
And then on Blu-ray and DVD. I have the Blu-ray DVD combo. And,
awesome.
Yeah. But then it's also coming out soon, again, a re-release with extra material.
A lot. Yeah.
And the book. So
yes,
the book fascinates me because usually the tie-in novel comes in at the same time as the movie.
Yeah.
And often it's written by some other guy, Alan Dean Foster, he's the guy, that you're, of course, I don't know how much he's writing right now. I think he did a Star Trek thing recently, but so many books I was looking at recently, and it's like, oh, he did The Black Hole. Oh, he did Alien. Oh, he did this one. Oh, he did that one.
Yeah, he really is the guy for that, isn't he?
Yeah,
you're right.
Yeah, Dark Star, even. I don't know if you're familiar with the movie Dark Star.
No, I'm not.
It's a cheesy sci-fi movie. It was John Carpenter's first directorial thing. that he directed
Oh,
it
wow.
in school, but then they got picked up by a studio and shot more scenes to make it so it could be released theatrically. Dan O'Bannon was involved in it. John Carpenter. There's a handful of other people who that's where they got their start. And in some ways, well, Alan Dean Foster wrote this book that actually fleshes out the jokes and like takes these moments. It's like just supposed to be a little goofy, a little silly, and he's like, "I'm going to make it make sense for science fiction." And like, okay, and it did. It worked. I just recently
amazing.
read it. So, but you did it yourself. You were able to, and you expanded it yourself, which is a whole different way. I mean, it's not Michael Crichton taking his novel and turning it into a movie. It's you taking your movie and expanding it into a novel. So tell me a little bit about why you wanted to do that and what you were trying to accomplish, and did you feel like you accomplished it with writing it?
Yeah, so I started writing the novel around the time the Blu-ray was coming out. So that would have been, let's see, it's November right now. So this was like late February, early March of this year. And so the movie had already been released. It was wrapping up its theatrical run. It was just getting into the international territories. And you would think after doing, well, actually, The Shift started as a short story that I wrote back in 2006, believe it or not. So that was version number 1. Version number 2 was, turning it into a short film. And then version number 3 was turning into a feature film. And you'd think after all that, I would be finally done with this story. And I certainly thought that I was. I never imagined I would turn it into a novel. But as I was sitting there, a few months after it had been released in the theaters, it just felt like there was more. I couldn't shake it. And I felt like there was another expression of this story and I just needed to get it done. And it surprised me. But I have learned, because it's how The Shift came about in the first place, I have learned that when I have those feelings, I got to follow them and I got to see where they take me. And so I wrote the novel over the next 2 months in secret. I actually did it completely in secret. I didn't tell the studio I was doing it. I didn't even tell my wife I was doing it. She knew I was on my laptop a little bit more than usual, but she had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And I did it, and I was able to do it in a completely different way than I think somebody who didn't write the movie would be able to do. Because in my head, I've got 27 versions of the script in my head. And I've also got about 21 versions of the movie that we edited. And in all of those different versions, there's so much material there that never made it to the screen. And then even outside of that material, there's so many ideas and things that I never put down on the page or in the movie. And so, as the writer-director, I have this unique position to where I was able to write the book very quickly and with a whole lot more detail, confident detail, and a whole lot more added stuff, scenes that are totally new, that fit right into the world that's been built, and that really enhance the movie you've seen without contradicting it. To be honest, like you could fold in everything that's in that book, you could fold it into the movie, and there would be no problem, essentially. So it was so fun to do it. I hadn't written a book in a while. I've written a few books, but I hadn't written anything like that in a while. And so it was really fun to get back and kind of exercise those muscles, but then to also to do it for this story and to do things that I think are going to really surprise people. For example, one of the things in the movie that happens, and you alluded to it earlier, is that when you first see Molly and Kevin meet, there's kind of these flash forwards where you kind of see glimpses of their relationship. Well, in the book, I made that 2 entire chapters. So we cover the breadth of their entire relationship over the course of 2 chapters, year by year. It's a 10-year relationship. And I'm able to mark out those years and say, this is what happened year 1. This is what happened year 2. And so we take them from that meet cute all the way to the moment when Kevin is taken away to another world. And you see the great love they have for each other, the challenges they faced, and ultimately what deteriorated their relationship and how it deteriorated their relationship and how they struggled to rescue it, but were having a really hard time doing that. And it was so great to go into those 2 chapters, which none of which is sci-fi. Like there's nothing science fiction about any of their relationship. And that was so satisfying. And then later on in the book, I was able to do things like, in the original conception of the movie, original edits of the movie, Rajit was this person that Kevin meets in the course of the story. They don't have a really deep relationship in the movie, but in the original conception of the film, they did. And so I was able to put that back in, where they have more of a friendship and more interaction. And then there's things in the multiverse. In the multiverse, there is some traveling through the multiverse in the film. We go to, 4 or 5 different worlds. Well, I was able to easily triple that, in the book. And now Kevin's going to all kinds of different worlds and seeing things that I think are going to be really, really surprising to people who are familiar with the movie. And then doing all of these things, it lets me, it lets people in more on Kevin. The whole book is told from his perspective. He's in every scene of the movie, so it just made sense to do it a first-person narrative. And so if he's a character that you're wondering about, why does he do the things that he does and what are his motivations? I mean, that's kind of the fun of novelizations, is kind of getting inside the characters' heads. Well, you get way into Kevin's head on this, and that was really fun to do. It was fun to explore that guy more, find out a little bit more about his background and how he's processing the things that the benefactor's telling him and the conclusions that he reaches. And I think for some members of the audience, I think reading this book is going to be extremely enlightening. It's going to answer a lot of the questions they may have had in their watching of the film.
And I had intended to have had the book read by the time we did this interview, but
Right.
I didn't get very far. And I read the introduction, and that was fascinating to me to see the course of starting in a short story, ending in a novel with a movie in between. That's the
Right.
your big budget thing in the middle, but then you have the kind of
Right.
bookends there that are actual
Well,
books. But
and I want to say about that, like in my approach to the novel was to think about in the multiverse of it all, to think about it in terms of, well, what if there was an alternate reality where I did write a book first and then I made a movie? So rather than just trying to adapt the movie that everybody's seen, I tried to reverse engineer a book that
okay.
never existed but could have. So that's how I think it reads. It reads as, if somebody were to read the book first, they would assume that, the movie was based on the book, even though it's the other way around. I wanted to give it that feel where there's enough in there that's different and new that you would assume, the movie definitely came second. I think that's the experience somebody would have reading it without seeing the movie.
And I was inspired a little bit. I did take an old comic that I had done, the first published book that I had done, and I turned that into a novella. I don't know if I'm ever going to release it ever, but it was fun to revisit that old thing and kind of take it and like build it out into, because it was a comic book, 22 pages or whatever. So there's not
Right.
a lot of meat there, the storytelling meat or whatever, but to be able to like fill in gaps and stuff like that. And so that was fun.
No, it's a fun
fun for me to do.
storytelling exercise.
So, yeah. And I'm all about storytelling exercises. I'm involved in a thing where every month you get a prompt and a word count, and you're supposed to craft a new story with that. And like that has been so much fun. And actually kind of leads into my next kind of question for you, which would be, what kind of advice do you have for not just young creators, but creators in general? Like what would you say, like if you know someone is wanting to maybe get into filmmaking, but just someone who is interested in expressing themselves creatively, whether it's film or printed word or whatever it might be, but what kind of advice or thoughts do you have for people who are doing that kind of creative endeavors?
Yeah, well, like anybody who gives advice of this kind, all I can really express is what worked for me. There's no one solution for anyone. So anything I say is colored by that. But for me, it was very much about following what interests me. I have always been fascinated by the idea of a multiverse and just the differences between them. And I also was fascinated by the idea of the idea of the devil and how he operates. And I was kind of hung up on this idea for a really long time. Like, how does the devil do what he does? How does he tempt people? Like, we know that he does, But how does he do that? And that's not really a question that's answered. Does he get into our minds, and can he influence our thoughts, or does he create circumstances somehow that tempt us? And so it was something I was hung up on for years, that I was just thinking about. And if you watch the film, I think a lot of the beginning will now suddenly make a new kind of sense, as far as like what I was trying to do with the multiverse aspect, and trying to explain something in a really interesting way of like, how does the devil operate? That's a lot of what the beginning of the movie is about. And so, that's me just following where the thoughts are going, following what is interesting to me, and not letting go of that, and realizing that my brain isn't letting go of that, and trusting that there's got to be something there. If I can't let go of this thought and this idea, and my mind keeps percolating on it and expanding on it, then there's probably something there. And so I'm a big believer in that your brain almost knows what you can do better than you can, almost intuitively. And so I followed that. But then, of course, the other side of it is get good at your craft. Learn everything you can. There's so many people who want to do, and they think that wanting to do is the same as being able to do. And it's not. It's not the same thing. If you want to do something, then become a student of that thing. Before I got into filmmaking, I was obsessed with DVD commentaries and behind the scenes videos, and reading Premiere and Empire and Starlog back in the day, and anything I could get my hands on that would tell me, like, how are these things made? And I was doing that because I loved to learn about it, never anticipating that I'd actually get into filmmaking. But because it was such a passion of mine, by the time the opportunity presented itself, I was way ahead of the curve. I knew there were certainly things I didn't know, but there was so much that I did know about storytelling, and about what a director does, and about the mechanics specifically of screenwriting, which are very different from novels and comics. And so this was something that I was passionate about, that I learned about everything I could, read every book I could. I didn't go to film school, admittedly. By the time I got into filmmaking, I was in my late 30s. It was way too late to go to film school. But I made up for it by learning everything I could. Because we don't need people with a lot of passion and no ability. We need people who are students of the thing that they want to do. And so that would be my two pieces of advice: is work on your craft, get good at it, and trust your brain, and follow those passions, those instincts that you've got.
All right, so let's do some a little more fast-paced questions here.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be kind of your preferences and your inspirations and things like that. So tell me a couple movies that inspire you. Not that necessarily inspired this movie, but just a couple movies that inspire you.
Sure. Well, my go-to is for this, I think, is always Gattaca. Gattaca is probably my favorite movie of all time, and it's a movie that not everybody knows about. Ethan Hawke, Jude Law, Uma Thurman, directed and written by Andrew Niccol, who also wrote The Truman Show, and it's a really prescient sci-fi film from, I think, 1998. I want to say
around in there,
around in there. It's about just mapping DNA and being able to basically make children to order in a society where people are growing up and they are essentially designed, and it's a triumph of the human spirit type of film. It's beautifully shot, beautifully made, and it is just about a perfect movie for me. I'm endlessly inspired by that movie, and it's one I wish more people knew about. And then the other one, and this one is a little bit more of a cliche, but I came about my love for it very, very honestly, and that's Citizen Kane.
Okay, right.
And when I say it came about it honestly, I mean it wasn't thrust upon me at school. I didn't do it for homework. This is back when you could go to places like the Warehouse and you could buy DVDs and everything. And I was in the store and I found myself with some money and I wanted to buy a movie, and this is before Netflix and all of that.
Yeah.
And I wanted to buy a movie and I wanted to buy something interesting. And for whatever reason, Citizen Kane jumped out at me. And I'm like, you know what? I've heard it's the greatest movie of all time. Sure, why not? And so I cold bought Citizen Kane without knowing or seeing anything from it. And I brought it home and I watched it and I was totally entranced. That movie more than deserves its reputation. It was so ahead of its time. You really, to fully understand Citizen Kane, you have to be a lover of film, I think. But I think also you have to put it in the context of its times and realizing just how many innovations are in that film. And I think it's just a beautiful, tragic story as well, that is endlessly rewatchable. Roger Ebert famously said that it doesn't matter how many times he's seen Citizen Kane, and that is a man who saw it a lot. He actually does the commentary for Citizen Kane on the disc. He never can remember what order the scenes go in, which I think is just a fascinating comment about a movie. You know, what causes that, and why is that interesting, that he can't remember what order the scenes are in? And if you know Citizen Kane, it's a famously non-linear narrative. But he's right. Every time I've watched it, I can never remember what comes next, and that just makes it so much more exciting. So for its craft, Citizen Kane, and then just for its story and its craft as well, Gattaca. I mean, for me, it's an odd pairing, I know, but cinematically and storytelling wise, that's kind of, those two films are in my DNA in a big way.
Citizen Kane, I didn't come across honestly, but I still loved it. Like, it was definitely a part of, it wasn't part of my film school. It was part of my before film school, where it was just like, we were going to watch movies with a capital M, you know?
Right. Right.
And that was one of those like, whoa. And it just washed over me. I loved it so much and bought it on DVD. Of course, I knew about Orson Welles from War of the Worlds and some of the things he did with that. But it was, so I didn't come across it, honestly. I was trying to be pretentious and we were looking for the, like I said, movies with a capital M. But Gattaca, man, that is a fantastic, wonderful movie. I just rewatched it about 4 months ago. And
awesome.
Just hits everything perfectly, I feel. Like it just,
it does.
And it's going back to, it's got sci-fi high concepts, but at the same time, it is about a very relatable human.
Yeah, it's very grounded.
And
I love
okay.
it.
So, favorite comic book?
Oh my gosh. That's almost impossible to choose. I'll say what I've been really into lately. I've been really into Sean Murphy's White Knight series. His alternate take on Batman, that whole back-to-back graphic novels that he's been doing, that whole just reinvention of Batman. Sean Murphy, I think, hands down, is my favorite and the best comic book artist currently working. But then as a writer, he's just so interesting to me, and he's so compact. Like, he is the opposite of decompressed storytelling, which I think has been kind of ruling the comic book world since Bendis first did it back in the early 2000s. Murphy is the opposite of that. Like, it's very compact and it's very, like, it moves like quickly. And he really makes you participate as a reader, especially if you go to that first White Knight graphic novel. You almost feel like you missed, like there was an earlier book that you missed. Like, you're kind of jumping in like towards the middle or towards the end of Batman's story. He's already got this relationship with the Joker and it's completely just kind of redone. But I'm a huge fan of that series. And every time a new one comes out, I grab it immediately.
There was a character in fiction that you could make, that you were asked to make a movie about. What would you want it to be?
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I'm throwing out the hard ones right now.
Oh, man. Yeah, I have literally never thought about that.
I try not to, because I know I never will. But there's a couple times I'm just like, man, I want to do an Aquaman movie.
Right. It probably, this is, I mean, look, James Gunn is about to do it probably better than anybody's ever going to do it. And Richard Donner certainly did it in an amazing way. But Superman, I've always had a deep love for. And I think that he hasn't been done right for quite a while. And I'm not saying that I know how to do him right, but I got a take, and I'd love to explore that. I think Superman would be really fun to do. Just a purely good character like that. He gets short shrift. I like what I'm hearing though about what James Gunn is doing with him. So I'm hopeful for that one.
I am too. Although when I found out he was going to be doing that, have you seen Brightburn?
I have not seen Brightburn. I know that's like his Dark Superman.
Yeah,
movie.
Yeah. It kind of got me a little, oh no.
Yeah.
But it sounds like he's not trying to do the twist. He's trying to do
not at
the
all.
character.
I mean, yeah, he's
And
brightly colored costume and crypto's in it. Like, this does not seem like I don't expect suicide. If he goes Suicide Squad with it, I'll be shocked too. I just don't think he's doing that. I think he understands that we need especially right now, we need a bright Superman for our times that we can look up to. That's what we're looking for. And I don't think we've really had that since Christopher Reeve.
I don't think so either. I think part of the problem, and this is my take on what's happening with Superman right now, is there are so many people writing Superman right now who just don't, I won't even say they don't understand him. They don't believe in him. You know,
that's exactly it. They don't believe in him.
In heroism and
right.
in doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. Or,
right.
I find Superman so interesting because he's someone who has to hold himself back. He could do so much, but instead he's choosing to do the good and to do the right. And he doesn't have to, but he's choosing to. And there's a lot of interesting stories you can tell with him that aren't being told because the people who are writing him are trying to do the dark twist or trying to do, my spin on it.
Right.
But a lot of times there are people who don't believe in morality or right or wrong or heroism or that kind of thing. So,
no, or they don't find it realistic, as though somebody with great power could also be really, really good and could choose to control himself. There's something that's unbelievable about that for certain people. And I find that sad and cynical and untrue. I know a lot of people who are very good and who don't wield their power like a hammer. I think it's also why for my money, the best Superman story of this century, and the one that I know is also a huge inspiration for James Gunn's take on Superman next year, is All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison and Frank Whiteley. That is an incredible book that absolutely gets Superman 100% right.
Have you read the Alex Ross Paul Dini oversized comics?
Yes, I have.
That to me is one of the best Superman stories of all time. I just Superman. I can't remember the subtitle because there's Batman War on Crime.
Right. I don't remember. I have
Wonder
it.
Woman.
Or I had it.
Yeah. I love that one so much. It's Peace on Earth. It might have been Superman Peace on Earth.
I think it was Peace on Earth. I'll be honest with you. It was stolen out of my garage. I haven't reread it in a while. And I don't remember that story very well. I love Kingdom Come though. Alex Ross did Kingdom Come. I think that would be one of the best Superman stories from the previous century would be Kingdom Come. But yeah, no, there are
because it's self-contained,
right.
And it's all about hope. That actually was Wonder Woman might have been Peace on Earth. Superman might have been Hope. I can't remember.
I don't remember. But somebody could look it up.
Yeah, and it's just, and they've done a collection of all of them together because there's Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and then Shazam, which is also surprising. And then there was a Justice League one that they did that had a couple different extras that went along with it. It's just this nice, cohesive, Alex Ross painted graphic novel series. It's just wonderful, just beautiful.
No, and he's an incredible artist. I mean, he's hands down my favorite rendition of Superman is from his brush, 100%.
Yeah, it just feels like this is a guy who's a good guy, a nice, kind, powerful but gentle, and and I can understand, especially if you feel more cynical. Like, you don't even have to be a bad person to feel cynical,
No, you don't.
Just to feel like, it's not very realistic. But then on the other hand, that's part of. I mean, I can accept that he could blow out a sun with his breath. I can accept that he's a good guy.
Right.
So
yeah.
What's your favorite franchise with the word star in it?
Oh man, I go back and forth, which is such a cop-out answer. But I feel like the franchises go back and forth,
That's
like
true.
they have their ebbs and their flows. They have their times of height and their times of lows. And so it's hard to say. I definitely go back and forth right now. I feel like Star Wars is kind of on the low end right now. There's been some really good things. Like, I'm a huge fan of The Force Awakens and a huge fan of season 1 of The Mandalorian, and then and Andor, absolutely incredible. I mean, I cannot wait for season 2. I think honestly, Andor season 1, I believe, was the best television show of the year that it came out, whatever year that was. It's in a tremendous, tremendous piece of television. But then outside of that, I'm much less enthusiastic when it comes to what Star Wars is doing. And then Star Trek, I really fell off on Discovery, Strange New Worlds, super up on that. Can't really get into the animated stuff. So, but I have love for both. My dad raised me right. Like he put Star Trek on the television, and then we went and saw every Star Wars movie together in the theaters. And so it's hard for me to separate the two.
Yeah, and I also, there's bonus points for Stargate, of course. Like that's another franchise.
Stargate, I could not get into, so I'll
right.
I'll say that one doesn't quite rank for me.
So the last of this kind of pop culture thing, but what is one of your favorite, and this is to tie it in back into the shift, it's one of your favorite multiverse stories?
I'm going to name something that I think most people would not think it was a multiverse story,
right.
but it genuinely is my favorite multiverse story. And if you think about it, it is a multiverse story, which is It's a Wonderful Life.
Interesting. Okay.
I
could
love...
totally... yeah. Okay.
No, it is. It's a multiverse story from the 1940s. And I mean, it's a beautiful movie. We all know why It's a Wonderful Life is great. But I do consider that a multiverse story.
You definitely get an alternate universe timeline.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, and actually, in some ways, tonally, in some ways, it kind of there's some similarities with the shift as far as
So if in fact one of the reviews
structure and
highlighted that it was It's a Wonderful Life meets The Matrix, I think was what one of the reviews said it was. Which I think, as a description of the shift, probably not that bad. I don't know that we're as good as either one of those movies, but as far as like the cinematic recipe, probably not too far off.
Yeah. Put it in a blender and so what are you up to now then? And this would be kind of you need to wrap up, but what are you up to now?
So I am working on a few different things. I have another novel that'll be coming out next summer, which I'm really excited about, called Paper Bag Mask. Not science fiction, and but I'm really excited about it. It's kind of a Breakfast Club meets Ocean's 11 type thing, which is bizarre but fun. And then I am writing another movie right now. It is science fiction. And it deals with it at least deals with themes that would be very familiar to a faith audience, and I'm really excited about that, and I think that probably has the best chance of being the next thing that I do. It's called Glide, and it kind of takes place in a world where telekinesis has been turned into a commercial consumer product. So it's something I'm really, really excited about. And then, the shift is also just something that my brain keeps going back to. And I would love one day to release an extended version of the film. There's so much that we cut out of the movie. And I would love the opportunity to revisit that world someday. I don't know in what context or how that might happen, but I'd love to be able to do that.
Excellent. So the book is coming soon, and is it going to be released broadly because all the ads I'm seeing for it are related to Angel Studios. Will it be?
Yeah, right now it's available for pre-order on the Angel Studios store. You can go to angel.com/shift-novel, and but once it's released, it'll end up at Amazon.
Okay.
And so you can just order it from there as well.
Excellent. And then the enhanced DVD or Blu-ray.
Yeah, the Shift Special Edition, which just comes packed with all kinds of stuff. 4 different commentaries, an entire black and white version of the film, which is really beautiful, and honestly my preferred way of watching the film now, and something that I handcrafted, did myself.
Okay.
And then
very
we've got
Twilight Zone-y.
Yeah, very. It really does, and it kind of going back to that original inspiration. And then we've got outtakes and behind the scenes features and an extended scene and all kinds of stuff. Animatic test footage. The whole script is even in that special edition. You can read the whole script if you want. It's the kind of special edition that they used to make that they just don't make anymore because discs are not quite the mover that they are in the retail space as they used to be. But Angel very much believes in that these movies are special and they deserve to be archived and treated well. And so we really approached this special edition as, let's put everything we've got into it. And this will serve as an incredible archive of everything that the shift was and did.
Excellent. Well, Brock, thank you so much for spending some time with me and hanging out and
Yeah,
geeking
thank
out,
you.
but also talking about your movie. Again, I recommend it. Uh, highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it the second time. I really enjoyed it the first time. Um, we'll see about the third time. I don't know. We'll see.
It might be too much.
But for now, first and second time, definitely enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and yeah, check it out. Check out the book. And it's called The Shift. And as usual, you can find us, strangersandaliens.com, facebook.com/strangersandaliens, youtube.com/strangers and aliens. And we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email to studioavery@gmail.com if you have any comments or thoughts about what we were talking about today. And until next time, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching, and Godspeed.